Hello and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to funnest. This is Battlefield 1. In today's episode of Fixing Battlefield, we're going to be talking about what I am dubbing Air Combat 2.0. My attempt to fix the way aircraft and infantry, as well as aircraft with other aircraft, interact in Battlefield 1. A number of changes and additions that should make both flying and fighting as infantry more enjoyable in Battlefield 1. The goals seem rather grand, but bear with me as I try to outline my vision of a much improved system for airplanes in Battlefield 1. Starting off then with the logical point, the current situation. Well, we've had recent complaints about aircraft being too OP, specifically of course the fighter trench variant, and there is a certain merit to those claims as well. But taking a step back from the hater train of the fighter trench variant, which now has been patched and its power massively reduced, how really is the balance between planes and between tanks, or vehicles more generally, in Battlefield 1 regarding kills? Because of course, pilots are held out to be these kill farming machines that seem to be getting way too many kills given that they're only sitting in a plane. Well, if you actually look at the stats, this is to say pre-spring patch on the last day of the previous Battlefield 1 public build, the 26th of April, this picture seems not quite to be confirmed, at least if you look at the number of kills dependent on which vehicle category. This is to say that from all the kills obtained by vehicles and stationary weapons, the category which Battlefield Tracker puts them all in together, well, tanks end up getting 59.3% of all kills, with aircraft making up second place at 28.3%. Now, it makes sense that aircraft should be overall getting less kills than tanks because, well, there's more tanks on the battlefield. At least in most maps, usually there's one more tank than aircraft, and there is a few maps, specifically I'm thinking of Amiens and Suez, where there is no aircraft but tanks. Nevertheless, the difference here is more than 100%. That is to say, the aircraft are getting less than half as many kills as the tanks are, and the heavy tank alone is getting more kills than all aircraft combined. Well, how did things then change post-patch? Well, as of the stats we have available to us on the 5th of May, essentially now 64.9% of all kills in the vehicle categories are attributed to tanks, whereas now only 22% of all kills are attributed to aircraft. This, by the way, is a relative decrease of 22.3% over the previous number. Another thing I'd like to note before we move on, however, is that this is a falling trend. The amount of kills being gained by aircraft is decreasing day for day as more and more players realize the power and potential of the new AA, which is the next point I want to get on to at this point. The infantry complained they didn't have an effective tool to fight aircraft, and that to a certain extent is true, and as a result we have a much more powerful AA since the spring patch. Not only did the patch buff the damage of the AA against all aircraft, 14.3% more damage in the case of fighter, 7.1 in case of the attack plane, and 8.3 in the case of the bomber, but more importantly, and this is what's making the AA so unbearable currently at this point in time, it increased the blast radius of the AA cannon. What's meant by the blast radius is the radius at which the explosion, the shell triggers its explosion when it comes close to your aircraft in Battlefield 1. That is to say, if you take an AA cannon previously, pre-spring patch, you would have to make your shell, the AA shell, get within 4 meters of your target for it to actually explode. This was only, of course, available against aircraft. Now, post-spring patch, this is 6 meters, and while this may not sound like a massive increase, it's only 50% after all. In practice, it means that you essentially get stun locked and downed instantly as soon as you come close to an active AA. And while we'll get on to the legitimacy of aircraft being downed by AA constantly a little bit later on in the video, what I do want to say at this point is that certain maps and game modes are now on certain teams close to impossible to effectively play as pilot. I'm thinking specifically of operations as attacker, where the defensive team already has a massive advantage because they usually have access to usable AAs, often even outside the range and sight of the enemy team in the next to be attacked sector, which is then of course their base, where the attacking team has to move up to the front line and contest the objective, already giving the defensive team a massive advantage when it comes to air defense. However, now that AAs are so powerful, it essentially means that aircraft, in many cases, until the actual team moves up right onto the objective, can't even risk going in for bombing runs on the objectives because the installed AAs, which are quite frequent in the meantime, make it impossible to successfully get out alive again. Moving on then from the current situation to the goals of Air Combat 2.0. Well, firstly, divert the main focus of pilots from ground targets to enemy aircraft. Furthermore, provide the ability for infantry without the AA to properly defend themselves from aircraft, make targeting of infantry less rewarding and more difficult for aircraft without nerfing them into the ground, balance the AA to be in line with other stationaries, making it a part of anti-aircraft weaponry, however not the only sole solution to combating aircraft, and and last but not least, a clearer differentiation between the fighter and the attack plane. At this point in the video, I'd like to recognize DICE's current efforts regarding balancing out planes and making the different variants more interesting. That isn't the main focus of today's video. However, there has been some changes currently being trialed on the CTE to make the dogfighter variant of the fighter the truly best version of any aircraft to take out other aircraft, as well as improving the attack plane's airship buster variant to make it more capable against other aircraft. So DICE, definitely keep up the work on that front. Moving on then to our biggest topic in today's discussion, infantry versus aircraft. The number of kills aircraft are getting against infantry is the main source of the disgrunt in the community, the plane and pilot hating. And in my opinion, there's reason for this. Planes essentially go mainly for infantry kills, and while this is no different from what tanks do, most of the kills tanks get don't come from killing other tanks, but come from killing infantry. There's a reason why people are more frustrated getting killed by fighters or attack planes. The simple reason is they have very limited abilities to defend themselves, can't often anticipate the incoming damage and death, unlike with tanks, and can't simply switch over to the assault class to deal with the threat. This is different from tanks, where they're much more predictable, they're much more easily avoidable, and they're much more easy to combat, with a whole host of opportunities and available weaponry to take them out. So improving infantry versus aircraft combat rests on two main principles: avoiding and fighting back. Starting off with the first, avoiding aircraft needs to be a possibility from now on. Now this sounds quite easy in principle, it's not in practice. How are you going to avoid somebody skydiving down onto you and bombing you? Well, the most important way of reducing the attractiveness of infantry targets is to actually make other aircraft a more attractive target for pilots. However, we will get into that a little bit later on in the video. Further options for reducing and avoiding strikes on infantry include some quite simple, some more complex solutions. First, reducing the visibility of 3D spots for pilots, or actually completely removing 3D spots for pilots, meaning that they actually can only target infantry they can see, not a bunch of red dots they see somewhere down on the map. This would make targeting infantry a lot more difficult than it previously was. Furthermore, reducing the effectiveness of the spotting abilities of pilots. Currently, as soon as you see a bunch of enemies somewhere, you hit the Q button and all 27 of them are lit up, and bombing them becomes a lot more easy. Make it much harder, or even maybe possibly disable spotting for pilots in the first place. Where we move on from simple solutions to more complex solutions, let's get some new gadgets into Battlefield 1 that specifically shield or make it more difficult for aircraft to target infantry. My personal idea with this was somewhat of a smoke cover gadget, maybe smoke umbrella. Feel free to come up with a better name if you have one. How this would function would be much like a smoke grenade, only that it would rise upwards and then spread above the ground. Think of it as an umbrella principle, simply with smoke. Now, how exactly you would want to do this and how wide of a range you would want to cover, I personally came up with the example of maybe 20 by 20 meters, and that this could be deployed by mortar. Another possibility would be to deploy it by scout flare gun, no longer obviously then a flare gun, but a smoke gun, or even as optional grenade that differed only from the normal smoke grenade in that the smoke would settle above the grounds, roughly 10 meters above, instead of on ground level. Well, there's many ways to implement it. The effect would be quite simple though. Fighters, attack planes, and bombers couldn't see targets in that given area. This may not seem too useful for those of you who simply play Conquest. However, for those of you who are more used to the operations game mode, which often comes with much more clustered, close-quarter infantry areas where aircraft can just start farming targets, this will seem much more influential in how effective it could be in protecting infantry. After all, you can't effectively target what you can't see. If you're having trouble imagining this in practice, think of it as low-lying, localized, player-created fog, if you so will. The second category of changes then regards fighting back. It's all good hiding and shielding yourself from aircraft and making it difficult for aircraft to see you, but you still have the feeling of helplessness when getting killed by them if you can't fight back. And currently the fighting back options are limited to finding an AA, sitting on it, waiting for the plane to come back round, and pressing the, as I would like to call it, I win button. There's a huge plethora of viable improvements DICE could make and additions DICE could make to Battlefield 1 to not only flush out the gadget game and give some classes which currently have only silly or kill-focused gadgets actually some practical gadgets. But first off, one of the more simple fixes: buff the AT rocket gun against aircraft. For fuck's sake, you should be doing a minimum of 50 damage when hitting an aircraft with an AT rocket gun. This is, after all, not an easy task. A further buff that you could give to the AT rocket gun against aircraft would be an automatic disabling of the motor or the vehicle as whole if being hit by an AT rocket gun. This would make assaults lethal to aircraft if they had good aim, prediction, and skill when using the AT rocket gun. However, there's many more options available. Incendiary Ammunition is my personal favorite suggestion that I came up with regarding a new gadget in addition to both scout and support to better able them to do damage against other planes. Currently on the CTE being trialed for the dogfighter plane is Incendiary Ammunition. Essentially a special ability to improve damage against plane for the dogfighter version of the fighter plane. An interesting idea, a great idea, and one that will certainly make the dogfighter version of the fighter plane more relevant. However, why leave it with the fighter plane? Why not extend it to infantry classes such as the scout or the support class? Now, if you want to bring in the argument of realism, please go and play a different game. This is Battlefield after all. Absolutely nothing about this game is truly realistic. How this could function in practice, you may ask? Well, for example, a different version of the K-Bullet, an incendiary K-Bullet, if you so will. Once more, a better name would definitely benefit the marketing of this gadget. Available to the scout to equip, that not only would do increased damage against plane, let's say for example 15 damage as soon as hitting the plane, but also set the plane on fire, gaining an additional 10 damage over the coming 5 seconds, making up a total of 25 damage. This would not only introduce a new interesting damage mechanic, damage over time for planes, but would also massively boost the amount of damage scouts can do to planes, giving the scout a much needed new gadget that will properly enhance its role in the team and make it vital to a team's success on any of the larger game modes. Moving on then to the support class and the Incendiary Ammunition, how this could work here. Well, essentially, much like the K-Bullet system works currently for the scout class. That is to say, you would carry separate ammunition for the Incendiary Ammunition, a separate magazine, maybe 2 separate magazines, and if you wanted to fire that Incendiary Ammunition, you would essentially have to reload, switch out magazines, and then you would be firing incendiary ammo. This would do a much reduced amount of damage against infantry, however would have a similar effect to the incendiary K-Bullet equivalent of the scout in doing increased damage over normal bullets against planes and further setting the plane ablaze for additional damage. With the infantry versus aircraft role then out of the way, and feel free to leave down below in the comments additional suggestions that you have for buffing infantry against aircraft, both in their avoiding and fighting back abilities, we move on to the role of AA in this new and improved Air Combat 2.0 design. Well, the role of the AA should be similar to what other stationaries are in Battlefield 1. That is to say, AAs should be a deterrent or assistant in most situations, but shouldn't be able to usually take out a pilot on their own. The current amount of damage they put out is not really in line with other stationaries. For example, if you use the field cannon to help take out a tank, it's very unlikely that against a skilled tank player, you're going to be able to win a one-on-one. However, if you use the stationary with the help of some other teammates, probably assault players who also attack the tank, you can drastically help them out and make the takedown of the tank much more effective. The same, I imagine or envision, for an AA. And for this to happen, well, essentially, most of the changes introduced by the spring patch for it have to be reversed. Specifically, and of course most importantly, the one that rewards sloppy aim. You shouldn't be able to miss your target by 6 meters and still do full damage to them. This needs to be reduced back to its 4 or even to less, so that it rewards the player who is accurate with the AA with suitable damage, but those who miss should be punished accordingly. Moving on to the mobile AA, the nightmare of any fighter and the result of salty pilots themselves, well, this should basically be brought in line with the normal AA. There's no justification for currently having its larger range. Yes, you need a tank spot for it, but in turn you get an AA and an AA gunner that is effectively invincible. Because other than the bomber, it's very difficult for any aircraft to take out the mobile AA because of course the gunner is protected in a tank, and usually they position themselves quite intellectually far away from any kind of combat so that no infantry or other tank gets to them, and the only way you could take them out truly would be by aircraft. And the bomber at that has a hard time taking out a mobile AA. If he misses or doesn't catch the mobile AA truck by surprise, he too will have very little chance in taking out that piece of armor. Another way of balancing the mobile AA, other than bringing it in line with the current AA regarding its firing distance, would be more interesting, however probably more difficult to implement, and that will be that when you fire the AA component of the AA truck, you would actually have to hop on the back of it. That is to say, you would switch seats, much like you can switch the seat in a bomber now, for example, as pilot. This would, in an ideal world, also include an animation, of course, which would make switching between the two not an instantaneous process, exposing the gunner of the AA finally to some degree of risk, both from enemy aircraft that could shoot his physical body and damage him with the normal bombs available on everything but, of course, the bomber, who has the ability to, of course, also properly damage the actual tank, and make it easier for infantry to actually engage the gunner as well. Normal AA gunners are susceptible to sniper fire if they don't watch where their AA is located, whereas the mobile AA is of course not. We move on then to the last category that we're going to be talking about today, aircraft versus aircraft. There's some fine-tuning, additions, and changes, in my opinion, that need to be made here as well, not only to improve the experience between aircraft and infantry, but of course aircraft and aircraft themselves. First of all, let's get this out of the way. The fighter nerf was in order, and it's fine. The primary role of this aircraft, after all, should not be to engage ground targets. Yes, it's annoying that you can no longer go on these huge kill streaks, and yes, I too miss getting the triple, quadruple, 5-bang, 10-bang kills on a game of operations on St. Quentin Scar. No question there, but it is in the end for the better of the balance of the game. However, the fighter needs to be the prime and most effective tool in taking out other aircraft, and as of now, it isn't really there. Well, what needs to be changed? Essentially, first and foremost, the amount of damage that the attack plane and bomber in their rear gunner positions can do, and at what range against enemy fighters, needs to get a nerf. Any semi-decent gunner in the back of one of those planes is easily going to tear up one, in many cases even two fighters before those one or two fighters can actually down an attack plane. And if you're thinking about the fact that, well, both of those planes essentially are one plane spawn, one vehicle ticket, if you so will, they shouldn't necessarily be on equal footing in everything, given of course that one has 2 seats and the other has 1 seat. However, they should all have their clear strengths and weaknesses. And if a fighter can't take out a fully staffed attack plane with a decent gunner in the back, well then the fighter isn't the best anti-aircraft plane in disguise, and then thus should maybe be buffed back to its original strength for engaging infantry. Speaking then of the rear gun, given that it gets a damage nerf, there's some more things that need to be done here. To make both the bomber and especially the attack plane more viable, you need to get people to actually gun for these individuals, especially the back seat, both on the bomber and on the attack plane, are usually not occupied. Why? Because there's not enough to do in those seats. Occasionally shooting at the 1, 2, if you're lucky 3 aircraft that are up in the sky is not much of a job. And once they're all downed, well, what are you going to do with your time? Sit around for 3 minutes while you wait for the next aircraft? Nobody's got that patience in Battlefield. People want to get back to the action, and as such we need to do something to improve basically the experience of a gunner on both the attack plane and the bomber. Note here please, I'm not talking about the front seat on a bomber, I'm talking about the back seat of course. And my idea of both fulfilling the objectives of reducing the damage of the rear gunner against enemy fighters, enemy aircraft, bringing it more in line with the damage output of the fighter, making it a fairer fight, and improving the experience of a rear gunner regarding how much fun, how much they have to do, how many targets they can attack, is give them the ability to properly target infantry. Now by this, I do not mean give them the gun that is currently sitting on the front of the bomber. That thing is a nightmare. I don't understand why it's on the bomber in the first place, and certainly shouldn't be on the back of an attack plane or a bomber either. However, combine the two, the current weapon and the weapon on front of the bomber, and kind of make a mix mash of a slower firing, heavier hitting version of the current one on the back that has a certain amount of splash damage to it as well, allowing it to at least theoretically target infantry and take them out. I wouldn't advocate for this to be an extremely effective anti-infantry gun, simply one that has the possibility to realistically get 5 kills in the space of say 5 minutes, only a little bit of tweaking on the CTE and testing will truly find out where the sweet spot here is. However, giving this position on the aircraft the ability to at least attack maybe one piece of infantry at a time and have a decent chance of killing them if their aim is very solid, of course, given that it's not easy to shoot from a moving plane, well then they should be rewarded with the possibility of taking out that target. This may of course lead to more kills from the aircraft against infantry, but with the other changes I think that shouldn't be too much of a problem. Another and very controversial point that may seem counterproductive at first is increase the spawn rate of aircraft to allow more air combat. If aircraft spawn back faster, then the pilots that have just dealt with those aircraft can't sit around farming infantry for half an hour, but have to prepare and start fighting the incoming aircraft as they respawn faster. The faster they respawn, the more aircraft are going to have to focus on fighting other aircraft instead of targeting infantry. This is an extremely effective way of encouraging players to stop only going for bombing runs, but instead start making sure that they target the enemy fighters that will otherwise take them out. Now, no way am I advocating for instantaneous spawns, just slightly faster spawns than from what we have now. Last but not least, small points to be noted here, however important ones, it should not be possible for the pilots of a plane to switch seats. I'm specifically, of course, talking here about the attack plane and the bomber. There is no situation in where you should be able to pull off what you are seeing right now on your screen, which I am doing. A solo attack plane pilot simply switching seats and easily taking out an enemy fighter who would have otherwise had a clean and easy kill on him. This should be left to the gunner, who should be sitting in the plane. The pilot should be flying. There needs to be a penalty for not having a fully staffed attack plane, because there is a clear advantage benefit provided to the attack plane, both pilot and gunner, if it is fully staffed. Another point to note, another way of encouraging planes to target planes more than infantry is maybe to simply change the way points work. Provide some bonus points for pilots taking out targets in the air. Every kill that they get on another aircraft or on another individual in an enemy aircraft, in the case of a bomber up to 3 obviously, provides, say, extra 50 points in a dogfighting bonus, while maybe the bonus amount of points received from multi-kills much more easily achieved in a fighter or an attack plane than any other vehicle in Battlefield 1 should maybe be slimmed down from, for a triple kill, what currently would be 300 points to, say, for example, 150 points, a 50% reduction. With me now having talked for easily over 20 minutes, my voice slowly running out, and me likely having soon completed the longest YouTube video I have yet to post, I'd like to hear your thoughts on my design, my options, my ideas, as well as the current state of air combat in Battlefield 1, not only down below in the comments, but also over on the Reddit. I'll link down below in the description the post that I will be making to this video, essentially outlining what I have outlined in this video here as well. I greatly appreciate if you head over there and leave feedback there as well regarding what you think of these changes, and maybe we can get a good discussion on this topic with the devs started and some of the better ideas from either me or you, the community out there, implemented into Battlefield 1. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. But with all that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for watching and hope to see you in the next Battlefield 1 video.